Saluti a tutti, and welcome to this episode of Ciao DMV, Italian-American Life in the DMV. My name is Joseph Barone, and I will be your host. This podcast channel is dedicated to all things Italian and Italian-American in the DMV, aka DC, Maryland, and Virginia. My focus is on the Italian-American experience, from family stories to little-known history to businesses to cultural events, etc. Mostly the good, but sometimes the not so good. Now, according to Mary Elizabeth Brown, who is the author of the book, An Italian-American Community of Faith, Holy Rosary in Washington, D.C., 1913 to 2015, she stated that the Italian festival began 2 days after the groundbreaking of Villa Rosa in Mitchellville, Maryland, which took place on September 15, 1963. Therefore, the very first Italian festival at Villa Rosa was held on September 17, 1963. Unfortunately, the Italian festival at Villa Rosa is no more. Today, I will interview Vincenzo Enzo Ciancio, and who will share with us some of his memories of attending the Italian festival held at Villa Rosa Nursing Home in Mitchellville. So relax and enjoy. Saluti a tutti, and welcome to Ciao DMV podcast, Italian-American Life in the DMV. Today, I'm interviewing Vincenzo Enzo Ciancio, hopefully I pronounced it properly, at least the Americanized way, on his memories of the Italian festival, which was held in Villa Rosa Nursing Home in Mitchellville, Maryland. Enzo, thank you for joining me. So let's get right into it. Enzo, where did you grow up? And tell us a little bit about where you grew up in the area and what happened to you.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Thank you for having me. And this is an amazing thing that you're doing. So I grew up in Prince George's County. I grew up in Hillcrest Heights. My family moved from Washington, D.C. I was born in D.C. And after a year, like many of the people from Orsonia, which is where my parents come from, they all moved to Hillcrest Heights. And I spent my years, my elementary, I did that at the Hillcrest Heights School until about fourth grade. And then my mother, during that whole busing era, she moved me to a Catholic school, and I graduated at Holy Family, and I'm class of 1977. So that's who I am. That's where I come from, and proud of it, Joseph.
That's fantastic. And in fact, as we were chatting even before this, my wife grew up in the same area as you did, as well as her brother, and went to the same school. So you actually, as we chatted a little bit earlier, probably even crossed paths a number of times and didn't even realize it.
Yes. Yes.
So let's get into it. What's your very first memory of attending the Italian festival, and who did you go with, and what year was that? If you can kind of give me an idea.
So Joseph, my parents are from a little town in Abruzzo called Orsonia. And Orsonia was a devastated town during the Second World War. And it had a lot of immigration. The people immigrated to New York, Boston, but we had a very, very small enclave of people that moved to Washington, D.C. And that was probably due to one or two people. And one of them was, I think it was the Tenalias, that they were in Washington, D.C. And my mother, that was her uncle by marriage. We ended up in Washington, D.C. The first memory that I have is long lines. They had a porchetta stand. And so if you know Abruzzo, you know that we enjoy our porchetta, or pork rolls, and the men would, together with the women, each family would prepare a porchetta for the sandwiches to be prepared and sold at the Villa Rosa festival. So I remember these preparations. It must have been 73, 74. I mean, I go back as that far, and I don't really have recollections before that, but I remember these preparations. I remember them going to the Holy Rosary Church, getting themselves ready, and because you had families that were making the porchetta, and you can imagine how many porchettas they had to make. I mean, they were doing these in their homes, in their ovens, and each person was bringing that the morning of. But together with that, you had people that were making salad. You had people that were making manicotti abruzzesi, which is a little bit different. We don't make it with ricotta. We make it with spinach, ground beef, and mozzarella and sauce. And let me tell you, it is an amazing dish. My mother was telling me this morning, and it brought a smile to her face to reminisce those days when the ladies were preparing this. They felt a sense of community, of being able to do this, and the men that were, usually men are the ones that are actually preparing the porchetta. They're getting it ready. It's a very manly thing to do, and so that's my recollection, and I remember driving in there, and the cars, they were in the fields. You would drive in and you would park in this field, and there was a Villa Rosa. I could see it at the top of the hill, and I don't think I ever went to Villa Rosa, but I could see it at the top of the hill, and the lines during our porchetta stand, the lines, I mean, people would line up hours before they would open to get the food because, eventually then you could end up getting a hot dog or a hamburger. But I guess everyone wanted a porchetta sandwich. And I don't blame them for that because they were really, really good. So that's my earliest recollection.
And so, what are some of your other memories? I mean, as you got a little older, you went. What were some of your other memories of the Italian festival?
So the pole, how can you not remember the pole?
The grease
And
pole.
the grease pole. So I didn't know this, Joseph, but the grease pole is an Italian tradition. I always thought that this was an American or an Irish or a Northern European tradition. It's actually a Calabrese tradition of going up this pole, and you would have at the end of the pole, they would grease this pole, and I would assume that God, it was lard or however you would grease this pole. But this is an Italian tradition. I learned this just this morning asking my brother. I asked my brother, "Dad, what do you remember?" And he says, "Enzo, the pole. How can you not remember the pole?" And he says, it's a Calabrese tradition that at the end of this pole, you would have pork products, salami, prosciutto. When you got to the top of the pole, that's what you would win, and I found that to be pretty fascinating. So, the pole.
You didn't participate as one of the teams on the pole, did you?
I didn't. I did not. I did not. I could never. That's something that I could never do. I was a pretty big guy, and so I didn't have the strength to pull myself neither on a pole or on a rope. No, I didn't, but I did see people that were doing that, and there was a whole strategy about, sending up a bunch of guys and then sending up the nimble guy that would eventually get rid of all the grease because, the grease would once that grease was brought down, now it was a lot easier to be able to do that. So, yeah, I remember that, but I remember the crowds. I remember the people and yeah, it was a lot of people, and it's amazing how w as a kid, I mean, I must have been maybe 14, 13, 14. You just let kids roam around, and I said to my mother, I said, "I used to roam around." And she says, "Well, what did you do, Ma?" He says, "Well, I would stay with all the other ladies from our club, and today, I don't think you'd let kids roam around, but yeah, we felt you just do that, and you just roam around with your friends, and we had a great time. It was always an event for us. I mean, no matter how it was an incredible event.
And so when you got to the festival and you roamed around, your mom was working at the porchetta stand part of the day or all of the day, whatever it was. Who did you pal around with in those days at the festival?
So traditionally, my friends were the Tenalias, the Finellis. We had a really interesting group of kids that lived in Hillcrest Heights, all somehow connected to, obviously our Italian origin. Most of us were Abruzzesi, most of us were Orsognesi. But then, we had friends that were of Sicilian descent. We had friends, somehow you acclimated to our parents being Italian and immigrants. They all had very much Italian friends. And so we had a nice group of people. There was always could be 15, 20 kids that we would roam around. It wasn't just me. I mean, I we had a big group of kids that would would go around the festival. And there were always these games, there were things to do. There was always an event, and it was like a big huge carnival, or more of a state fair. I would say that it was probably it looked to me like a state fair, but it was very Italian, which and you could smell the sausages. I can still smell those right now. I can smell, I can hear it. So yeah, it was great times.
Now you said that you left the US, in our conversation before. You left the US at the age of 15. Did you ever get a chance to go back?
Go
Well,
No, I didn't. I actually didn't. I don't even know what happened to the festival. Is the festival still happening? Is or so yeah, that's I never had that opportunity, and that's something. So, we went back to when I was 15. I think it was in the 10th grade, the 10th grade. We left for Italy. We went back to Abruzzo. I was attending Bishop McNamara. And, I didn't speak Italian. And you can imagine I was very much immersed in trying to understand, trying to learn proper Italian. I understood a little bit of dialect, but I guess I was so enthralled in trying to learn. And I went back to the US back in, I think it must have been, so we left in 79, I think it was. I didn't go back until 1983 or 84. And yeah, so no, I never did go back, but I have some wonderful memories. And remember, from those years up until 1979, I am sure that we participated from 72 to 73. I can remember every year. It was an event. I mean, it was something that we went to. I don't think that, when did they hold this, Joseph? What was the time, the period? I don't remember the time period. When
So according to my research, it started in September of 1963, just after they broke ground at Villa Rosa, and it remained until I think about 2015. I went to, I guess, the last one that they had. Now, I think there were a couple of years they didn't hold it. I did go. I am not a native Washingtonian. I'm originally from New York City. And when I moved down here in 91, I came here a couple of times in the early 90s, a number of times in the 90s. And then I stopped coming because of our kids and this, that, and the other thing. But I think the last one was about 2015. It was a much smaller event. I'm not sure if the Sons of Italy ran it or who was running it towards the end.
and what was it exactly? What was Villa Rosa? Was it a retirement home? What was that? What was it exactly? Because I know from speaking to my mom, it was highly sponsored by Holy Rosary Church. I mean,
That
that
is
that was the church that somehow was able to unite all of Italians, whether you were from Sicily or you were from, you know, Veneto. You ended up at that Italian church because it was the center of our culture, of everything, I would say, in DC.
that is correct. So The idea stemmed from Father DiCarlo, who wasn't a Scalabrinian priest, but it stemmed from the idea of trying to take care of himself and other older Italians. What are you doing in retirement? Although ground wasn't broken, my understanding, until 63, shortly after the Scalabrinians took over, it was a nursing home.
Okay.
And there was a lot of fun. Italian community, mainly people from Holy Rosary, raised funds. You would have a room named after you, a hallway, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that the Scalabrini fathers, I have to look into it, are still running it. I believe it's now run by a private organization. I think it's still called it looks like as of this morning, it's still called Villa Rosa, but it's not has a religious tone as it did before.
And just do you think, Joseph, that there's a need for an Italian home? Because I have a friend, and he grew up in New York City too, in New Jersey, and his mom, she didn't speak English very well. She ended up now imagine she ended up in Atlanta, and she had a hard time in some of your nursing facilities simply because she didn't feel like she was in the right environment. And my friend would say that to me. He says, they just don't cook the way we cook. And in the end, an older person really doesn't need all this elaborate food. You make them a pastina with a little bit of pasta, and a little bit of olive oil, and some cheese or some stuff. That's what they really need. It's a very, very simple way. And I kind of said to him, I said, Paulo, I don't know. Maybe there is a need for that in this grand U.S. Maybe that's an opportunity that we're missing. But that's just me talking out loud.
Sure. And that might be an interesting conversation for another thing. I'm not certain nowadays if there is a real need, as the population has changed from Italians who have immigrated here to more Italian Americans
That's true.
like
Yeah.
myself, who Italian is more of a dialect and we understand some, but not everything. So I'm not sure if that's a
Yeah, that's
interesting concept or a question, but not certain if that's one as pertinent as it was maybe 50 years ago.
yes, absolutely. She probably was 87, not maybe in her 90s, and I can imagine my mom or my dad having to go to one of these facilities and having a hard time. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right.
So are there any other last thoughts about the Italian festival before we end our conversation?
Nothing more than, Joseph, as the bonds of immigrants coming here, having a community, doing doing this charitable work, or having a sense of purpose, and it's a very interesting thing. It, like I said today, and reminding my mother of those times, it brought a smile to her face, how they were all so involved, and how that sense of community, and they had a great time doing it. And the memory is yes, let's do it, but it was that sense of being together, of doing something, of being, of having fun. These ladies all came from the same town. They knew each other. They had everyone was somehow related. When you're from a little town, and now you're all of a sudden you're transposed into the US, they were this united them even more. And so it's kind of sad that we don't really have that anymore. But it was great times, Joseph. I think it was sure. I think we should go back and we should kind of look at that. It brought a real smile to an 87-year-old this morning.
Well, great. Well, Enzo, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your memories of the Italian festival at Villa Rosa and sharing them on my podcast, Ciao DMV. Once again, Enzo, thank you so much.
Joseph, grazie, grazie. Thank you very much, Joseph.
I would like to thank each of you for listening to this episode on remembering the Italian festival. I hope that you enjoyed it and that it may have brought back some fond memories for you. If you're interested on being on this podcast, please feel free to contact me at ciaodmv@gmail.com. And please remember, if you enjoyed listening to this episode, please take a moment to like, comment, subscribe, or even share with a friend. This is Joseph Barone, your host, signing out. Ciao for now.